party. They are waiting patiently for us. Let's head down for round 1 of Grand Prix Bologna.
Hello and welcome to Grand Prix Bologna Round 1. I am Tim Willoughby here with Frank Karsten and Rich Hagen in our booth, and we're going to get a chance to see our first round of Dominaria in action here from Italy. The format is team sealed, and each of these players, they'll have put together a deck from between them 12 boosters. We're going to get a chance to kick things off with Joel Larsen against Alessandro Lippi in the middle here. Two powerhouse teams here meeting the very first round of this GP.
Well, the first play of the game is a Knight of New Benalia, which, in general, 2-drops are not as high priority as they have been, because they're pretty easily blanked, but it's still a fine attacker, especially because Joel's creature cannot block.
Yeah, Ace the Glider, it can fly in for 2, and that's exactly what we see it doing here. All it's ever going to be good for is attacking, but if all it's doing is attacking, that is pretty decent here. It's actually Joel on the left of our screen and Alessandro Lippi on the other side there. We can recognize Joel's distinctive ring on his hand there, playing things out and getting a legend into play. Yes, we're going to see a block with the Call for Cavalry, making 2/2 Vigilant Knight tokens for Lippi here. And a Juggernaut to follow things up for Joel Larsen.
Well, Juggernaut has been around in Magic for a long time, but it is still pretty good. 5/3, must attack each turn, and now the player on the left, who is still Joel Larsen, is pretty far ahead in the damage race. That the Nita Capashen also pretty solid in the damage race. 2/2, first strike, lifelink, vigilance, effectively attacking for a 4-point life swing every turn.
Yeah, the extra ability of making auras and equipment work out a little bit cheaper. In some respects, not even the main reason to work with it. But, sometimes it will come across, and when that happens, obviously lovely.
That's a Daring Archaeologist for Lippi, which is being dealt with right away. Making sure that Joel can keep on attacking for 7 this turn. And Lippi, whose turn 3 play was just not able to block, it says so on the card, and is now pretty far behind.
So a Blessed Light there was able to deal with the Archaeologist. The Archaeologist, a 3/3 that will get bigger as more historic cards get played. As things stand, Alessandro Lippi trying to go a little bit wide there with a Davenant Trapper and that Misa Unicorn. He's finally found a little bit of lifelink, but it might be too little too late, as Joel Larsen has been able to beat down with that Juggernaut and a little bit of help from its friends there. The Juggernaut having to attack each able, it means that, yes, in principle, you can kind of assemble blockers for it at some point, but equally, it hides any kind of combat trick that you might be using, because it's always going to be attacking in each and every time. Just a regular Juggernaut there, as opposed to a Darksteel one. Does still have to attack each turn if able. Yep. Can't be blocked by walls.
Now, if Joel doesn't really have anything, then Lippi has reasonable blocks to stabilize the board. He can put his Davenant Trapper, 3-power creature, as a blocker on the Juggernaut, and then double block the Nita Capashen with both of his 2/2s, even through the first strike that will make sure that one of his 2/2s will trade. But
Icy Manipulator, though, if we were talking about cards that almost 100% of pools will be playing, Icy Manipulator has to be right at the top of that list. A colorless, very potent answer to almost anything that's going on. It's been around since Alpha. You get to pay 1 mana, tap it to tap target artifact, creature, or land. Pretty much any permanent you need to tap, it can tap. And here it means that the Juggernaut is able to make a slightly more problematic attack.
Yeah, this is one of the better uncommons in the set. And now Lippi has... he just took the damage, it looks like. Now down to 3 life. Lippi did not want to double block that Juggernaut, which is interesting. I figured he might actually be getting into a position where you have to start to line up some blocks, especially given that with Icy Manipulator, you often have the potential play of tapping a creature at the end of your opponent's turn, untapping, tapping something else, and then effectively using it over the course of a turn cycle to take out 2 possible blockers. Now, that's not going to be that relevant with Juggernaut, because it has to attack one way or another. But okay, now Lippy goes for the double block.
Oh, Jo Larsen just figuring out the way he wants to order blockers here. Cognizant that there might be a combat trick coming on the other side of things. No tricks on either side here. The Juggernaut should be in the graveyard. There it goes. Cloud Reader Sphinx coming along post-combat for Jo Larsen, and that meaning that he's going to be able to get a little bit of scry going on.
Yeah, this is one of the better common creatures. Scry 2 in the late game is pretty much the same as drawing a card, and that'll do it.
Yep, so Jo Larsen takes game 1 here in round number 1. A reminder that 2 of the 3 team members have to win their matches to claim the round for their team. So in a moment, we'll head across town, either to Table A, which is Vidar Hesselman against Matteo Vasari, or take a look in at the Pro Tour champion, Samuel Lestrade against Nicholas Dahlqvist. So we'll head across to a match that's still going when we get that opportunity, and we'll be back to see Larsen and Lippy continue. Ace for Glider there, the bit... Oh, hello! Board state. We'll get into that in a bit. There's a seal away there. There's a rampaging 4/4 that's only a 2/4 if it's blocked twice. We're just in time to see Khan's Temporal Sundering, I do believe, has just happened for Vidar Hesselman. He's also got Tiana there as well.
Yeah, that this might actually put Lippy down to 1 life if nothing changes. Khan's Temporal Sundering, one of those legendary sorceries that are pretty hard to cast, because you do need to have a legendary creature on the battlefield, and those tend to be removal magnets, so opponents will rarely let them live. But, you know, if you have a strong legendary sorcery like this one in your pool, you can just set up, for example, create a 3-color deck with all the best legends you have so that you can cast it consistently. And it has been doing a lot of work here for Hesselman, taking out a blocker and then making sure that you can attack twice. Just took Vasari down from 15 life down to 1.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have to splash something, I think Tiana a pretty solid splash. There are plenty of good enchantments to get back. Rampaging Cyclops there, if it gets to attack unimpeded, very potent, very good rate on that creature indeed. And that's exactly what Hesselman has been able to set up here.
I like this card. It always works as a 4/4 blocker, and especially in the early game, or when you can use some removal spells, or when you are in a damage race, it's not that easy for opponents to line up a double block. So the majority of the time it will be a 4/4 with no drawback, which is way above the curve for a 4-drop.
And we can see here Vasari very much on the back foot here, just 1 life to play with. Could this be the team of Hesselman, Larsen and Dahlqvist picking up another Game 1 win? Yes, it appears so. This is, of course, a team tournament. It is best of 3 matches to win the round. So even if it works out that Vidar Hesselman, for example, wins his match against Matteo Vasari, that does not mean that the Italian team cannot win the round if Alessandro Lippi and Samuel Lestrade both won theirs. But with the Swedish team of Hesselman, Larsen and Dahlqvist already 2 Game 1s up, they've got to be feeling pretty good about things as they go to sideboarding.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, what you indicate is one of the big things that I like about team tournaments. Even if you lose your own set of matches, I guess you can call it, you can still look in with your teammates and cheer on them and hope that they will carry you for the round. It makes it for a more, fun experience to get there, win or lose together.
Yeah, getting to play alongside your best friends, always a very pleasant experience. And then on top of that, something that we're likely to see over the course of this weekend is when we get into our final games of the round, they can take a little bit of time because suddenly you have 3 minds trying to figure out how to play things out rather than just one. And we've jumped into a barnstormer of a game here for the final Game 1. Samuel Lestrade with Muldrotha the Gravetide in play, along with a whole host of Saprolings. On the other side of things, we've kind of got a Saproling mirror here. R&D have identified the green-black deck as being about fungus tribal, if you will. And while there aren't lots of Saproling tokens in play for Nicholas Dahlqvist, he has many of the key green-black creatures in play that play very nicely with them.
Yep. Well, I mean, this is the casual board state where there's 16 creatures total, which we will get in Dominaria more often than not. This is the type of format where the games can go long. I would have to favor Estrati here because that Muldrota allows you to replay permanent cards from your graveyard, potentially multiples if you have different types, something like a Blood Tallow Candle. Meanwhile, Dahlquist is assembling some nice synergies. Indeed, the solid Soothsayer. There's also the Fungus and Saproling Lord that work well with all the Saprolings. But I have to imagine that.
Is that a Verdant Force in Samuel Estrati's graveyard?
I think it might well be.
That would explain where all those Saprolings came from, and with Muldrotha the Gravetide in play, that means that we could very easily see the big, scary Verdant Force coming back relatively soon. And dealing with Verdant Force once, sometimes referred to as the greatest fatty ever printed, is difficult. Dealing with it multiple times seems like an untenable task.
Was that the greatest fatty ever printed? Was that a quote? Was that a Jamie Wakefield originally?
That was Jamie Wakefield.
There we go.
Secret Force was the deck that he liked to play back in Extended. And yes, it was Verdant Force that was the big all-star of that deck. 62 cards, Jamie Wakefield special. But in Limited, he's back. He's still big. He's still a very scary threat. Mammoth Spider, one of the cards in the format that's a solid blocker for a lot of what's going on, and at common it does a lot of work, but in these green mirrors it sometimes has to face against creatures that even it can't reasonably tussle with.
Yep. Well, meanwhile, I think Nicholas Dahlquist cast Song of Freelies. That's the saga on the bottom there, which is one of the cards that has overperformed for me so far, especially in focused draft decks around cards like Saproling Migration. And Martin Juza was chatting with him yesterday. He called this one of the better cards perhaps in the entire format, if you have the right deck for it. Now we'll see how Nicholas can abuse this, because the mana ramp from Song of Freelies often a bit better in the early game. In the late game, it also allows you to kick some cards, and he could have kicked Grun with the mana from his creatures, but perhaps he did the math and figured out that he still needed a bunch of blockers.
I think it's possible that this is a situation where Grun's lack of trample is most apparent.
Yes, it doesn't have any evasion of any kind, and there are more than enough Saproling chum blockers on Estrati's side. And this is a sweet attack with the Yavimaya Shepherd. Estrati doesn't really care if it dies at all, because Muldrotha will just get it back along with a Saproling.
He actively wants it to die in some respects.
Get in the bin.
So Dahlquist just made sure not to have the Yavimaya Shepherd die. He just chum blocked and then drew a card with the solid Soothsayer. Yeah, Dahlquist is still behind. If the board stands as is and nothing else changes, then Estrati should be able to win in a long game, mostly thanks to Muldrotha, I think. But Dahlquist, he is digging through his deck with that card draw solid.
Something to note here, Alessandro Lippi has already squared up his match against Joel Larsen. I think this one is likely to be the game that is going to go, game one that is going to go longer than maybe an entire match elsewhere because of quite how clogged these board states are. And while there are lots of creatures on both sides, there's not an obvious big swing that's going to kill anyone anytime soon, I wouldn't say.
Oh no, this match is gonna take a while, but that removal spell that Dahlquist drew, the Ancient Animus, effectively it's always a fight spell, but if you have a legendary creature that is gonna fight, it also gets a +1/+1 counter.
Yeah, it's a very weirdly worded card, isn't it? Because it sort of looks like you can't, initially when you read it, you think, oh, I can't do that unless I've got a legendary. No, it's a fight spell, and then it just happens to have a legendary bonus.
Yep. But yeah, it allowed Dahlquist to take down the Muldrotha, which was the most important card on the entire board. And that effectively swung the whole game. Now, I would say that Dahlquist is suddenly ahead. This is a type of format, I think this indicates it nicely, where prioritizing and rationing your removal spells is more important than ever before, because games go long and there are plenty of late game bombs. Imagine that Dahlquist had this Ancient Animus maybe in hand earlier and spent it on a random 3-drop or 4-drop. He would have really regretted that decision. This is a format where you don't want to just spend your removal spell on the first possible creature.
Well, we've hit the chorus of the Song of Freyalise, and you can see that the crowd of dice all coming out now, and suddenly Nicholas Dahlqvist's team looking a lot more impressive. Whether or not he can necessarily get big attacks through here is not super clear. There are lots of saplings on the other side that can jump in the way, but now they would be jumping to their doom, and it looks like Samuel Astrati can't quite deal with all of the power that would now be coming across thanks to that Song of Freyalise, because there is Vigilance, Trample, crucially, and Indestructible on those creatures. So even if Astrati had found a way of surviving that big attack, he was going to be left with too little afterwards to be able to take it down.
Yeah, it's the combination of all of those abilities that make it hard to find reasonable blocks for Astrati here. And even sometimes when you go for an alpha strike that is attacked with all of your creatures, you are a bit at the risk of dying on the backswing when all of your creatures are tapped and the opponent attacks back. Well, here it has Vigilance, so Song of Freyalise does everything.
Vigilance, a slightly unusual ability for green, but very potent when it gets it. And here we get a chance to see a little bit more of Joel Larsson against Alessandro Lippi. This was the match that we started with. Larsson picked up a very quick game 1, but Lippi was able to punch back, and we are into a game 3 here. So this is going to be our first match decided, likely on our middle table here.
2 cards that Lippi is putting to good use are Pegasus Courser, which has overperformed for me, one of the better white commons. It's an excellent way to break through a board stall, which can happen often, along with Mesa Unicorn. Now, Mesa Unicorn by itself, a 2/2 is not a great body for this format, but if you can combine it with, for example, Pegasus Courser to give it evasion, that lifelink actually becomes very valuable.
So we see Danitha there making a lance a little bit cheaper to cast for Joel Larsson, and then he gets extra value from it because that Davenant Trapper does mean that Jousting Lance, it will trigger the Trapper and mean that he gets to tap down a creature. So Joel Larsson here has the opportunity to get some swings in, and indeed he has some lifelink of his own thanks to Danitha. So everything working out quite nicely as Capuchin's Heir coming down, getting to attack in, and Vigilance, lifelink, everything working for Joel Larsson there to keep him in this fight.
A little suspicious that the lance is not getting equipped to anything. Joel instead opting to keep mana up. Might signal something like a Gideon's Reproach, right? 4 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. Perhaps some other trick. We'll see.
And there is a trick coming, but it doesn't appear to be a Gideon's Reproach.
No,
there.
it's Invoke the Divine. That's actually a naturalize or disenchant effect with some life gain tacked on.
It's quite a lot of life gain as well.
Yeah, a callback to Divine Offering from many moons ago. There are lots and lots of callbacks in this set to cards from the early days of Magic. Not necessarily from Alpha, because actually a lot of the early sets did happen on Dominaria. I believe that Divine Offering was Legends it was first printed in.
Well, Adamant Will says no. It does give Indestructible, so that will help Lippi to save his Ace-tier Glider from the removal spell. This is one of the reasons why Adamant Will is one of the better pump spells in the format. Not only can it help you to have your creature win combat, like all pump spells do, but it also protects them from removal spells.
Joel Larsson dropping to 12 on that attack.
Not sure if the life total got updated already. Might be. Because the life gain from the Invoke the Divine still happens. It's not like Adamant Will counters it, just gives it Indestructible.
So Cloud Reader Sphinx there, finding 2 lands on the top of Joel Larsson's deck. I can't imagine that he needs too many more lands in play in the latter stages of this game. He may be looking for something a little bit more potent. If
he keeps them on top, then we have something nice to look forward to. Then almost surely he's holding some sweet 6-drop that he needs the mana for.
The Sphinx also conveniently means that Ace the Glider and indeed the Pegasus Courser suddenly not looking nearly as exciting.
Exactly. This technically stabilizes the board, and that's also why it is not going to survive. Blessed Light immediately takes care of the flyer.
Yeah, instant speed, exiling target creature or enchantment on that Blessed Light. Yes, you're having to pay 5 mana for it, but it's unconditional removal. And exile actually does prove relatively relevant in this format. There are creatures that can come back from graveyards and effects that allow you to do so.
Yeah, and sometimes the ability to exile enchantments is also relevant against sagas, for example, but also against In Bolas's Clutches, one of the better uncommons. So just a bit of extra options.
Eviscerate, they're coming down for Alessandro Lippi as well. Having access to black, of course, means that there's going to be more creature removal. It is sorcery speed, you're paying 4 mana for it, but destroy target creature, 3 powerful words in Magic the Gathering.
So basically 3 and a black at sorcery speed is the Eviscerate.
Apparently so. So Joel Larsen here, he's having to face off against both a relatively stable clock from Alessandro Lippi and removal spells at the same time. If it was one or the other, he might be all right, but with both of them put together, he's on 6 life and he's going to have to do a little bit of work to get things going here.
Yeah, well, he is potentially taking 6 in the air next turn, given that Pegasus Courser is giving Daring Archaeologist flying. That's exactly 6. But Joel kept up a bunch of mana. Now, there are lots of flash creatures in the format. Ref Capuchin, for instance, that's a 3/3 flying in white and blue for 4 mana that can be flashed in at instant speed. If I were Alessandro, I would expect something like that.
Well, of course, Raf Capuchin, and there he is, the ship's mage, also triggering that Davenant Trapper, meaning that a creature gets to get tapped down before it can indeed attack.
Some sweet synergy here. I mean, blue-white is generally the color combination with the most historic payoff triggers. And you also see that in the gold signpost uncommon that is Raf Capuchin. It does make historic cards a little better.
And look at that, no attacks at all from Alessandro Lippi in the face of this newly adjusted board, thanks to Joel Larsen playing his powerful uncommon there. I like the fact that the uncommons in this set do give you a really clear idea of what color combinations are really trying to achieve.
In chat, someone helpfully points out that puts him in a RAF spot.
Good to know. Thank you, chat. We appreciate all of your input.
All of the input.
As
all
indeed
of it.
yours, Rich.
Oh, well, quite. I like the way you lumped me together there. Thank you.
You are the voice of chat.
Do you know, I'd never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Sarah Angel now coming down for Joel Larsen, and he really is turning a corner here. Powerful flyers coming down for him. That Sarah Angel will get to attack in every turn thanks to Vigilance. Has flying, which makes it a tricky one to block. But Benelish Marshall coming down here for Alessandro Lippi. White, 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 and suddenly his entire team getting +1/+1. Is that going to be enough for him to be able to squeeze anything through here?
Well, it will definitely help. There has been debate, by the way, whether this is the Marshall Sutcliffe Invitational card or not. But
there's been a few of them over the years.
Yeah, well, but this is definitely a good card addition to Standard as well. Let's see if Lippi can attack. Let's see, he swings with... no, I don't really see it. Mesa Unicorn will be blocked by the Trapper. Pegasus Courser can give maybe the Daring Archaeologist flying. But if he then swings in with everything, Joel will block the Aesir Glider with Sarah Angel, block the... well, maybe the Pegasus Courser with the Ref Capuchin, and then block the Mesa Unicorn with Davenant Trapper. Sure, Lippi would be able to get in for some damage, but then he also loses a creature in the process. Yeah, it wouldn't really get him anywhere. It seems like Joel has stabilized for the time being. Can also now attack with Vigilance with Sarah Angel. And also thanks to that Ref Capuchin, Lippi will always have to worry about any legendary creatures flashing in at instant speed if Joel has some mana up as surprise blockers.
Alright, so a Mesa Unicorn coming down for Joel Larsen here.
Yeah, I still don't see a great attack for Lippi. The situation hasn't really changed compared to last turn. Golden Cavalry, nicely 3/3 creatures, thanks to the Benelish Marshal. Maybe, let's see, on the next turn, he might be able to start swinging all out. Istier Glider is a historic card, so that can be flashed in with Rev Capuchin.
I like that. Also, tapping down a key Pegasus Charger here. We might see Jol Larsen prepping for a pretty substantial attack here. He does have quite a few flyers.
Though, as a creature, like 2-1, it can't block, and if it attacks, it will... well, I guess the Pegasus Courser was tapped, so now it can at least attack for 2. Not the greatest card for Joel to have here. What he really needed was another good blocker. Because let's see, if Joel attacks here with the Glider and Sarah Angel, sure, he puts on a clock. Maybe add an equip from the Jousting Lance to deal even more damage. Perhaps then re-equip Jousting Lance to the Mesa Unicorn to have some extra lifelink power on the swingback. It looks like Joel will be able to survive on the next turn, even if Lippy attacks all out.
A nice position to be in, and of
Oh,
course,
wow.
on Sarah's wings here, doing a lot of work, getting to be cast at instant speed, tapping down a creature, and turning that Davenant Trapper into a terrifying threat on the board. Essentially 2 Sarah Angels now to work with. The Glider, is that the Glider or the Sarah Angel, is picking up a Lance here. One way or another, we're going to have a big flying first striker.
Well, it might be appealing to put the Lance on the Trapper to get some extra points of damage with lifelink. I mean, it might seem a little dangerous if Lippy has a removal spell, but I think if Lippy had something like a Gideon's Reproach, he would have just attacked all out on the previous turn.
All right, here comes some big attacks. The fact that 2 of these creatures don't even have to tap to attack, particularly
6,
galling
8.
here.
Oh, Invoke the Divine. Well, that works.
That definitely changes the math on this pretty substantially.
And that must also be the reason why the Jousting Lance didn't go onto the... Well, maybe it still would have been fine to put it on the Davenant Trapper.
Yeah, Invoke the Divine means that Lippy's life total a little higher, and that Davenant Trapper much more straightforward to block now. There's still a big amount of damage coming through in the air here. It will mean that Lippy needs to be a little bit careful of his life total.
Yeah, it would have been exactly lethal otherwise. It was exactly 15 damage coming in the air, which was Lippy's life total. So just having that disenchant effect was huge. Has been huge in all the games we've seen so far. This is probably a format where playing such a card main deck is fine. And it actually won Lippy the game, because Joel tried to go for the kill, left himself without many good blockers, lost the life link enchantment that he was putting his hopes on, and now the Italian game has won the first set of games.
So that's actually really important in the context of the overall round, because Hasselmann's 1-0 up on Vasari, Dahlqvist is 1-0 up on Estrati, and had Larsen gone on to win that, without that Invoke the Divine that you see there on screen, that could very much have put the Swedes truly in the driving seat. But as it is, 1-0 up to the Italians. They've still got plenty of work to do. So we're going to head across to Nicholas Dahlqvist against Samuel Estrati, which was a very grindy game 1. Let's see how we're going in game number 2. Well, this may not take so long.
Yeah, Samuel Estrati here has put together a pretty potent beginning stage to his game. Fungus very much online. It's just going to be a matter of whether or not Dahlqvist can bounce back from these early turns. Already +1/+1 counters on the entire team for Samuel Estrati. And while there's the likes of, say, an Eviscerate in hand for Nicholas Dahlqvist here, that can only deal with one creature, and there's a lot of creatures, each of which represent pretty important threats when the life totals are 18-5 in the Italians' favour here.
Yeah, and you have to imagine that Estrati used Song of Frailes here to put all those +1/+1 counters on, and might also be the reason why none of his creatures are tapped at the moment. But yeah, Estrati pretty far ahead here, and Dahlqvist does not seem to have great blocks. If Estrati attacks all out, let's see, Dahlqvist has to block at least the Dead Bloom Thalit and the Yavimaya Saphert. Fall down to 1 life potentially, but then he cannot even like properly double block and take anything down. No, Dahlqvist is just in chump block mode. Yeah,
Caligo Skin Witch, not super exciting when you aren't kicking it. I mean, the fact that it's a 1/3 for 2, solid enough, but right here it's just facing down against a huge amount of pretty decent attackers. and Dahlqvist is going to have to string a few nice turns together if he's going to come back from this one.
I mean, you would like to double block the Sapperling token and then chump block one other creature, but you cannot do that. Then you take too much damage and just lose immediately.
When we go off air, the two of you can thank me for not reading out what chat's talking about right now. I have never seen so many terrible sapling and fungus-related comedy. Oh,
I
dear.
mean, we've always known that the chat were fun guys.
See, that was one of them, Tim. All right, there we go. It's 1-1. And I tell you what, why don't we stay here for the decider between Nicholas Dahlqvist and Samuele Estrati? Because if Estrati can win game number 3 here, that will be the match to the Italians. Meanwhile, Matteo Vasari has quite a lot of work still to do on table A. Must win game 2 and then a game 3 if that's how that's going to be decisive. As a reminder, we have time warp magic here throughout the weekend, so when our main match is finished, there's an entire back table of 6 more players, 2 more teams going at it, table A, B and C, and we'll bring you as much of that as we can before we head into live coverage of each subsequent round. So as a reminder, you're listening to the dulcet tones of me, Rich Hagan, and him, Tim Willoughby. Say hello, Tim.
Hello, Tim.
And him, Frank Carson. Say hello, Frank.
Yep, I'm operating within established parameters.
Good. Talking of established parameters, we've got a very special guest at the end of the show during extra turns. When round 8 is done, in our main match, I'll be back with extra turns where we play Magic at 4 times the speed. That'll be interesting with a new set. So we'll be doing that, and I have a very special guest commentator and guest. Yes, someone very famous is going to join me in the booth, and that's after round 8 tonight. But here we are in business with Nicholas Dahlqvist and Samuele Estrati. Frank, you're sort of peering at lots of bits of paper, some of which have check marks next to cards. What's going on in this matchup, do you think?
Yeah, I'm indeed looking at the deck lists of both players. Well, Nicholas Dahlqvist, both decks seem to be filled with, Sapperling cards and the synergy that works with that. Dahlqvist, for instance, has Sapperling Migration, the sorcery that puts either 2 or 4, if you kicked it, Sapperlings in play, which he can then boost with, for example, with Spore Crown Talit or Song of Freyalise, or potentially eat for value with Talit Soothsayer. Dahlqvist also has plenty of other sagas in his deck. Rite of Belzenlock, also known as Tales of the Pit, where you first make a couple of 0/1s and then a big 6/6 demon. Also the Eldest Reborn. Both cards have performed quite well for me, but the Eldest Reborn may not be as valuable when Samuele Estrati can just sacrifice a Sapperling.
Just looking at the players there on screen, the fact that Matteo Vasari is now there looking in on this means my detective skills tell me that the Swedes have evened up the match on table A, and that this is now the decider for the round as a whole. But we'll get confirmation of that in a little bit as the players get ready for game number 3, and with the call will be Tim Willoughby and Frank Carsten.
Yeah, players just drawing their opening hands here. I'm excited to see whether or not Samuele Estrati, with a little bit of blue in his deck, is able to get something going. He's, in addition to having a copy of Muldrotha the Gravetide, who is obviously a very powerful legend, there's another powerful legend that is supported in his blue splash, that being Tatiova Benthic Druid, a very nice addition if you're able to cast it on time and then just sort of simply play the rest of your games. Every time you play a land, you get to gain a life, you get to draw a card, and that's the kind of thing that if we get into one of these board stalls, could prove very decisive.
Yeah, looking at the deck list, it seems like Estrati's deck, at least the main deck that he registered, who knows how the players sideboarded, seems to be a bit better in the late game. Besides these blue legends that you mentioned, he also has Verdant Force, which we already discovered in game 1, and even Whisper Blood Liturgist to get him back from the graveyard, even if they die. And he combines all of those powerful late game cards with some green mana ramp like Lanor Elves, Elfhame Druid, and Song of Freyalise. of course.
Question from the chat says, haven't the left team won already? I mean, it's already in their favour by games, right? And yes, that's true. It's 4 games to 3. But that's not how we determine it. You play the best out of 3. So Hesselman defeats Vasari 2-0. So the Swedes lead 1 match to 0. Larsen lost to Alessandro Lippi. So that's 1 match each. And now we're in the deciding game of the 3rd and deciding match, which will lead to the round win either for the Swedes or the Italians. So I hope that's clear enough.
And so you know, it doesn't make any difference in terms of tiebreakers, the details of how all of those individual games go. It doesn't matter whether or not a team wins 2 matches to 1 or just wins 2 matches. As soon as a team gets to 2 match wins, that is the end of the round, and they advance as the victors. And we see a very potent turn 2, turn 3 here, as Song of Freyalise coming down on turn 3, immediately being used with those 2 saplings in order to carry on getting more creatures in play. And this is one way that the green-black deck of Samuel Ostrati gets to go wide.
Oh yeah, even though Dahlquist has perhaps the best 2-drop in terms of individual power level in the format, Samuel Ostrati is assembling one of the better combos you can have in green-based decks. Sapling Migration into Song of Freyalise. We may even see this in Standard. It provides you with so much mana, so much ramp. I mean, he's potentially able to cast a 7-drop on turn 4, and then boosts all of those Saplings and other creatures that he may put down on the next turn with a global effect. Song of Freyalise, especially in decks with Sapling Migration, is incredible, and we'll see what Samuel can do with all the mana he has access to on this turn.
Yeah, Knight of Malice, a very potent card individually, but it's hard to fight quite all of the action that gets happening with that Song of Freyalise. And here we see a big old spider coming down alongside, well, the poster child of the fungus deck, Spore Crown Thallid. All of those fungus creatures and indeed saplings getting +1/+1. Apart from, of course, the Spore Crown Thallid itself, it just sits around as a 2/2, but a 2/2 that is likely to get a little bit bigger as we get to the final stages of the Song of Freyalise.
Oh yeah, on the next turn, Samael threatens to attack for 15 damage worth of indestructible trampling vigilance creatures. And Dahlquist currently doesn't really have any good blocker yet. Ostrati is super far ahead, and Dahlquist even seems to be missing his green mana.
Yeah, playing mono black against the likes of this start from Samuel Ostrati, a little bit tough. Black not known for its enchantment removal, for example.
No.
It's really interesting to me that sort of there are formats where enchantment removal sits very squarely in the sideboard. I do not believe this to be one of those formats.
No, playing 1 in the main deck is perfectly fine. Also, most of the enchantment removal also destroys artifacts, and because of historic, there are several decks that have an incentive to play even somewhat mediocre artifacts just to trigger certain cards that care about historic spells. So you will often be able to find a target, and some of the better uncommons like Icy Manipulator and in Bolus's Wings. We also see Song of Freyalise, that looking at this game probably deserves a spot up there as well. It's quite valuable to have access to such an effect.
Now, we can see that the pace of play has slowed down a little bit here as we hit what must assuredly be the final game of this series in round 1 here between the team of Hesselman, Larsen, and Dahlquist, Vasari, Lippi, and Ostrati. That being in part because all 3 members of each team will be weighing in on decisions here to some extent, or at least could do so. The team format, one of the nice things available is that if you want a little bit of extra advice, guidance on a specific decision, often like some mulligan decisions and so on, you do have teammates that can give you their opinion.
Yep. Well, and probably they're trying to figure out how to potentially win this game. Starting with a removal spell for the spider. Might as well do that while Ostrati is effectively tapped out, otherwise you might run into some kind of counter spell. And well, when you're not planning to block anyway, given that the Song of Freyalise will give all the creatures indestructible, might as well attack. Now the plan for Dahlquist is to, soak up a ton of damage. Probably 11, I think. Might be off by a few. And then hope that Astrati is kind of out of gas and has a board of, a bunch of 3-3s with nothing to follow up. Well, if that is the case, then Dahlquist can play somewhat defensively from now on and claw back into this.
Yeah, this is definitely a moment where Nicholas Dahlquist has to hope to get a little lucky, having been a touch unlucky in the early stage of this game, still on just the one colour of mana, and facing down against a powerhouse start from the Pro Tour champion on the other side of the table. Nope. The Vigilant team hitting the red zone.
Easiest attack ever.
Caligo Skin Witch jumping in the way of something, but this is quite a lot of damage coming through. Those saplings 3-3s thanks to that Spore Crown Thalid. And it looks like the follow-up play from Samuel Astrati isn't all that exciting. Just getting down another mana creature there.
All right. Well, depending on what the last card in Astrati's hand is, whether it is a big action spell or not, Dahlquist may have an ability to stabilize.
I mean, the Elfheim Druid will mean that if it's something with Kicker, then actually the mana acceleration is comparatively large. But that Druid, when all he's looking for is the final few points of damage, isn't going to do too much.
No. Also, typically, the kicker costs sort of head out at the sort of 7 to 8 range. And so, right now, even with Kicker, he's at 6. With the 2 from the Elfheim Druid. So, not an awful lot of things that he'd want. Like, for example, an Academy Drake would be 7 with Kicked.
Another Sepperling migration would be pretty good here.
Yeah, that would be great at 6.
So Astrati almost surely doesn't want to attack with the Thalid Lord. You don't want to lose that one. You can attack with both Sepperlings, but then Dahlquist will block one with his Deadbloom Thalid. Those will trade, and probably double block the other one. So you trade for, I guess, Knight of Grace. Yeah, might be an okay trade still, but it doesn't really get you anywhere. Well, this will make it better.
One of the premium removal spells in the set, Vicious Offering there. 1 on a black to give target creature -2/-2, and then if you do pay the kicker cost, sacrificing a creature, then you get to give something -5/-5. That one of the best commons in the set.
Agreed. It's the type of removal spell that is good early, kill a 2-drop, kill a 3-drop. But it scales so well in the late game, and especially in green-based decks that just have a bunch of Sepperlings lying around. So you can sacrifice them and kill your opponent's bomb. That's the type of removal spell that I'd love to have. Even instant speed, so sometimes you can screw up double blocks. It does it all.
And for the low cost of just 1 on a black mana, we were talking about kicker costs typically getting up to 6 or 7. when your kicker is sacrificing a creature, suddenly the rate gets fairly exciting, at least on the mana.
Yeah,
front.
and also sacrifice a third of a card, or a quarter of a card, or half a card.
Yeah, suddenly when the removal spell changed the equation, attacking with the Spore Crown Thalid becomes reasonable. Because even if Dahlquist would get the ability to trade for it, which he is probably interested in, you do get in for a bunch of damage and put Dahlquist down to a relatively low life total.
Yeah, I can definitely see the temptation to try and get through damage early while Dahlquist is still working with just black mana, because I would imagine that there's at least 1 or 2 cards stranded in his hand, currently unable to be cast due to not having the appropriate lands to do so.
Yeah, but this seems like a good block. Dahlquist would take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 damage. Is in danger of dying to Gift of Growth, the +2/+2 or +4/+4 pump spell that can get kicked thanks to the Elfheim Druid. So he might want to consider chum blocking if he's really scared of that. Though I do think that if Astrati has the pump spell, well, you're not in great shape either. One benefit of chum blocking with the Sepperling here is that this turn you can still prevent 3 damage, whereas next turn the Sepperlings will have shrunk. So if you chum block then you're preventing less damage.
And the whole of the team on the left of our screen just figuring out the details of this block, a kind of pivotal play for them. They're obviously working with the information of what is remaining in hand for Dahlquist, to potentially bounce back with here.
But this double block on the Zeppelin is fairly obvious, because you'll take down the big Talit Lord, and Astrati only gets to kill one of your creatures. Oh, he did. Oh, no, it's not the Gift of Growth, it's Ancient Animus.
Well, Ancient Animus, an interesting one here. A fight happening to deal with that Knight of Malice. Liking that quite a bit, because now that means that we will see both those creatures going to the graveyard. The Thalid gets to stay alive. Huge amount of damage going through for Samuel Astrati here, and it's one Saproling versus the Saproling squad, and well, the squad takes it. Handshakes all around here as the team of Matteo Vasari, Alessandro Lippi and Samuel Astrati, in spite of a slightly slow start in that overall series, able to take it and get the first win for them over the course of this day one here at Grand Prix Bologna.
Yeah, great stuff. So that's our main match done. That was all live, and we'll do that every round. But we have some time walk for you. We're going to head to our back table in just a little bit. And first, some messages. Hello everyone, welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Bologna. We're at MTG launch. Rich, Tim and Frank with you. We've just had our first main match live with the Italian trio emerging triumphant over the Swedes. Two Pro Tour champions going at it. We have more action to bring you, so let's head down to our back table. This is Time Walk, so it happened during round one. This is round one more again, so we're going to take you to the very start of the match between a German trio of Koch, Toms and Lehnert, and they're against another Italian trio of More, Seeback, Daniello. But Frank, in that main match that we saw there, we talked before the match about players splashing a third colour here and there for little things, and we actually mentioned Tatiova, Benthic Druid,
Yep.
and there's Samuel Estrati doing precisely that. Is that what we're going to see more of through the day?
Well, especially in green decks, because green has access to some fixing. For example, the Song of Freely also Grow from the Ashes. And I do expect that many teams will be interested in splashing some of these sweet gold cards in their green decks if they have the fixing.
Tim, we talked about the power level in this format. It's worth sort of saying a little sort of warning, I suppose, that a card like Song of Freyalise is going to look really good on a day like today, where every deck that's playing it has, presumably, a spare Saproling Migration available to cast on turn 2, right? So but perhaps some of the cards are going to look a bit sexier, for want of a better term, than they might in regular sealed or in draft.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that one of the things that Team Sealed is really good for is getting a kind of template for what you should be looking to work toward while you're drafting.
Okay.
I don't think that it's necessarily a reasonable goal for what you should be going for in Sealed. If you get there, fantastic, good job, well done.
Hey.
But in terms of drafting, I absolutely think that you can see a Song of Freyalise early and say, well, I saw Samuel Estrati do some very powerful things with that.
Right.
I'm going to take that card, and then I'm going to take various ways of making lots of creatures, and I'm going to beat people about the face and head with all of my creatures that are now huge.
This seems like an excellent plan. Let's see if that happens on the back table. It's Time Walk time here in round one. So we've got, as I say, René Koch, Jason Toms and Heiko Lehnert on the left against another Italian squad, Matteo Mori, Andrea Seeback and Carmine Daniello. So away we go. Tim and Frank alongside me in the commentary box. Away you go, Tim.
Well, it looks like we've got unstable lands on both sides of the battlefield, but for René Koch here, he is on black-white, starting things off with that Jousting Lance. He has white cards in hand, but no white mana to cast them just yet. And Pegasus Corsair, the first play from Matteo Mori here. That one, a lovely addition that with almost any threat, it becomes a convenient, evasive threat that is able to get in quite a bit of damage, great against any kind of award store.
I also like the design because it makes for interesting decisions. It's a high toughness creature with a bonus when it attacks. So it plays reasonably well on defense, but also works well when you're attacking. And just having the choice between which route to go, that makes for interesting games of Magic.
So Call the Cavalry here, making two 2/2 Vigilant Knight tokens for Matteo Mori here, advancing his board very nicely. Meanwhile, just that Davenant Trapper in play for René Koch thus far, alongside, of course, the Jousting Lance.
Yeah, I think you see the bread and butter of the white creature base in this format on display here. Of these, the card I like best or would be most happy to first pick is Pegasus Corsair, just because it helps you break through board stalls. But all of these are perfectly reasonable cards to fill out your creature base with. Davenant Trapper is one of those cards that cares about Historic, which is a team that is mostly concentrated in white, blue and black. And while it is nice to tap down some big opposing blockers, Davenant Trapper doesn't work as well against two 2/2 Knight tokens. So obviously no attacks.
And the Trapper, very much an aggressive tapper. It's not the likes of your Master Decoys or similar that we've seen from other sets. Because it's tapping things down when you're casting historic cards, typically that means you're tapping down at sorcery speed, kind of, and that means that it's about clearing a path for attacks rather than stopping a big threat.
Although we have already seen Joel Larson flash in Rev Capuchin, a legendary creature with flash to tap down a creature on his opponent's turn, but that is a pretty rare interaction.
So Pegasus Corsair is able to block one of the Knight tokens here, but that does mean that 3 damage getting through for Matteo Mori here. Let's see what his follow-up is post-combat. seems like a great time for a Sphinx, but you know what? That's not the world that we're living in just yet. Instead, he's getting Voltaic and indeed throwing down Knight of New Benalia. So he's got a reasonable number of knights in play, and that Knight of New Benalia, yes, as a 3-1, it can be a little bit fragile on the ground, but if it gets to fly to the air with Pegasus Courser, I don't imagine that Moray will mind trading the 3-1 for his opponent's 1-3, given the opportunity.
Yeah, it's not the most impressive set of plays on turn 5. But turn 2 Knight of New Benalia, turn 3 Pegasus Courser. That is a solid aggressive start that we might also see sometime later throughout this weekend. Now René did not equip the Jousting Lance, which is surprising, or at least it would indicate that he has access to some kind of trick. It might be Gideon's Reproach for damage to an attacking or blocking creature. Maybe something like Cast Down, also an instant that destroys a non-legendary creature. Could be a pump spell. But yeah, Matteo More would have to expect something here. And fortunately, this is team limited, so you can ask your neighbor, hey, what kind of instants are there again in this format in white and black that I have to worry about? And then maybe he will give you some of the ones that I mentioned.
Now, Tetsuko Umezawa, Fugitive, a nice addition from Matteo More here, means that his attacks get to send something else to the air, because both that Voltaic Construct and Knight of New Benalia has either a power or a toughness of 1, meaning that both of those creatures unblockable.
Yeah, this is a very powerful addition to the board. That even if Koch has some kind of creature, will make it much more difficult for him to even block in the first place. Okay, he does have Vicious Offering, which is a removal spell. But then there's still a bunch of creatures you cannot block.
Yeah, Tetsuko Umezawa, the Fugitive, very, very potent, even the turn that it gets cast, as he does come down and make it so that all the creatures already in play that fulfill the appropriate criteria cannot be blocked.
I'm a little bit surprised that Koch chose to kill an attacker with the Vicious Offering and not the Tetsuke Umezawa, because if you go into a long game, that will just threaten to keep getting in together with the Voltaic Servant for its cheap shot here and there. But
I guess that you would have to sacrifice a creature to do that, though, because it's a 1/3 legend, and the -2/-2 itself wouldn't be good enough.
Yep. That makes complete sense.
So along comes Danitha Capuchin Paragon for René Koch. So that's the 2/2 first strike Vigilance lifelink legend for just 3 mana. Also means that auras and equipment cost 1 less to cast. That not really the main reason that you're playing Danitha there. It's that massive pile of abilities, keyword abilities, and simply the fact that it's a historic card.
Yep, it's always good even without any pump spells or synergy. But when she's gonna carry a Jousting Lance, might turn into a pretty menacing attacker. On the other hand, Moray just paused with a bunch of mana up. It might be a bit risky to just invest lots of mana into equipping a Jousting Lance and then losing your Danitha Capuchin to some kind of removal spell or a trick.
So both creatures attacking in here, and there is a trick coming from the other side of the battlefield there. That a Blessed Light able to exile our legend before it's able to get in for any damage whatsoever.
That's Teshar, which may lead to all kinds of funky, 4-card combo decks in Standard, but is not long for this world.
Yeah, Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle, potentially threatening to do all sorts of damage every time a historic card getting cast, returning creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Probably makes sense to kill that one with Extreme Prejudice as soon as you can.
Extreme Prejudice, yes. Have you been on the wrong end of Teshar yet?
I haven't. It's
not
I would
fun.
say one of the cards that I desperately want to brew with in Standard, Modern, Legacy. Pretty solid in Vintage when you've got all those Moxies lying around as well. As things stand, though, it's the other side of the battlefield that's suddenly got a powerful flying white legend. a different one coming along there.
Shalai? Shalal?
Shalai, Voice of Plenty. You don't need the green activation in order to play it. It's always a 3/4 flyer, which is already a good deal for 4 mana. It also gives all of your other cards hexproof, which could turn out to be quite relevant because it means that René won't be able to kill Tetsuko Umezawa even if he has a removal spell. And, well, Shalai also has a green activation to boost all of your creatures, but Moray doesn't plan on using that.
So Lingering Phantom is the card that René Koch is attacking in with here. The 5/4 that whenever you cast a historic spell, you can pay a black and return from your graveyard to your hand. So a tricky one to deal with in the mid to late game. Meanwhile, Arvad the Cursed coming into play for René Koch. He doesn't have any other legendary creatures right now, but as and when he might, Arvad does give them all +2/+2, and in the meantime, he himself has both Death Touch and Lifelink.
Yeah, and Lifelink being the most important ability there, because René is currently losing 5 life per turn thanks to Shalai, Tetsuko Umezawa and the Voltaic Servant. If he equips Jousting Lands onto Arvad, then he suddenly has a 5 power Lifelinker and can effectively nullify all of that evasive damage coming in. That was actually one of the ways that he could beat the team that Moray had set up.
I hope we won't see this on camera this weekend, but it is worth saying that because there are more cards being opened and decks are more focused, there are going to be decks that have 2 Arvad the Cursed or 2 of any particular legendary, particularly the uncommons. And of course the legend rule says you can't put 2 Arvad the Cursed side by side on the battlefield. I imagine somewhere in the room someone is going to go, watch how they each give each other +2/+2. Oh no.
Well, you of course have teammates to like prevent you from doing that. Say no. But yeah, legendary permanents. It is usually an upside because of all kinds of historic triggers or creatures that get bigger when you have a legend. But sometimes a downside.
And I would say that almost all of the legends that you would consider playing one of, if you have 2 of them in your pool, you probably should play both of them.
Yeah.
Because they're powerful enough cards that even if you sometimes have one sat in your hand waiting for the first one to die, it's not the end of the world. So here comes Arvad. He's got a lance. He is, with First Strike and Death Touch, pretty unassailable in combat. And he's going to be gaining a lot of life for René Koch here, which he very much needs. Currently sat on just 2.
Still, that Pegasus Courser that Moray added may change the equation. Even if Koch goes up to 7 life here, Moray can attack with Shalai, the Courser, a flying token, and his 2 1-power creatures, which would be an attack for 8, which means that Koch can then block a knight. But then on the next turn, Koch has to jump block the Shalai. This is shaping up to be a pretty interesting damage race that is reasonably close.
So you're currently 3 combat steps ahead of what we're watching right now, Frank.
Yes.
just being clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Moray has to think 3 turns ahead in order to figure out how to block here.
Sure. No, I that was not mocking. That was being impressed.
Now, it's worth noting that the team on the right of our screen, Matteo Moray, Andrea Shibak and Carmen Daniello, currently they've got a game on their side already. Heiko Lehnertz has already succumbed in game 1 to Carmen Daniello, and that is a little bit of a sort of confidence booster for the Italian team on the right of our scene here.
So one important, potentially important interaction is that Jousting Lance, it always gives +2/+0 to the creature, but only First Strike when it is your turn. So if Moray attacks with all of his guys, and then his Mesa Unicorn would get blocked by the Pegasus Courser, he would still gain 2 life.
It's actually a pretty fantastic bit of flavour, because a Jousting Lance really is at its best when you're driving forward, right? I mean, when it sits there, it's still big, but it is not quite the same fearsomeness.
And you know what? I'm really happy with it from a function standpoint in game as well, because First Strike on defense is a really miserable thing to attack into, whereas First Strike on attack is just sort of a little extra bonus for the attacker.
Yeah, you come charging past if you want with your great big jousting lance. Meanwhile, hello. Is that Zajid?
Yep, that's
Zahid,
a callback,
Jinn of the Lamp.
callback to the old Mahamoti Jinn, except with like almost 25 years of power creep, where you can also suddenly play it on turn 4 if you have, for example, a Voltaic Servant, and this might explain why the Voltaic Servant is actually in More's deck, given that if you don't have any synergy, it's not that good, but if it enables a turn 4 Zahid, it's pretty insane. And now, well, Koch is in a tough shape. Even if he equips the Jousting Lance to the Arvad, More could just block it down with Zahid. Sure, would lose to that touch, but that's at least a trait that More might not be unhappy with.
Yeah, the Jinn of the Lamp. Every artifact gets to pretend to be a lamp with Zahid in play, and is enough to take that game 1 for Matteo More. So Matteo More wins his game 1. Carmine Daniello wins his game 1. The team on the right of our screens has got to start feeling fairly good about where their rounds are going, and we get a chance to jump across and see a little bit of game 2 of Daniello. He has principally green-black deck up against, well, Jund colours on the other side of things. I think that somehow or other it seems to work out that this table at one end is always the one where the Saprolings plus decks go.
Right, it was the same in the previous match as well. There was also a black-green with one player splashing a color mirror match. This time, however, we do see the black-green gold card, Slimefoot, which is obviously explaining what this whole archetype is all about. It's building Saprolings.
Yeah, and it looks like on the basis of the graveyard that Heiko is already in the business of spending 4 mana on Slimefoot. Also worth mentioning, pretty basic stuff, but Slimefoot, it isn't a tap ability, so in the games that get grindy, 8 mana is 2 Saprolings if you choose to do it that way. And Heiko's very close to that.
Well, Multani Yavameya's avatar has just come along for Carmine Daniello.
Gulp.
Reach, trample. A 0/0 gets +1/+1 for each land you have in play. So by my count, that is 8 lands currently in play for Carmine Daniello. And he can get Multani back from his graveyard by returning lands to his hand. So a persistent reach, trample threat for the Italian on the right of our screen here.
Trample being the big thing here. If Multani didn't have trample, then Heiko could just easily keep blocking with Saprolings, draining in the process. That's pretty easy. But now, that's not really a great long-term plan. You would take 7 trample damage every time you block with a Saproling. And Heiko, I mean, he could line up some kind of weird quintuple block to take it down, but Multani will just come back. What Heiko may be planning at this point is to just take the hit from Multani, maybe do it another turn, and then swing in all out with all of his creatures, including all of his Saprolings. And then thanks to Slimefoot, it doesn't matter whether Carmina blocks a Saproling token or not. Either it connects for damage or it dies, and then there's a drain trigger on Slimefoot. But Heiko doesn't have a whole ton of time to set up his board full of Saprolings, because that Multani is a reasonably fast clock.
And so here we see the potential answer to at least some of what's going on the other side of the battlefield here. Fiery Intervention coming from Heiko Lehnert. 5 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact. It looks like he's just trying to figure out what the best target for it is.
Yeah, and I think Carmina wants to perhaps keep it alive, because, well, for one, it gives a good blocker that can stop all of those attacks from Heiko. And also the ability to gain 2 life when you sacrifice a Saproling may just prove to be decisive in, well, the damage raise that we're likely going to see over the course of the next few turns.
Yeah. Talking of the next few turns, we're going to speed things up because pairings are up in the venue. So we're going to get to hopefully the end of this game, and then we'll tell you what happened in the match overall while we turn things around and get ready for round number 2. But meanwhile, down comes the... oh, look, it's an island. It's a splash. I wonder what that's for.
this is interesting. Carmine played Skittering Surveyor pre-combat to grow Multani, though it does mean that Heiko suddenly gets the option of, let's say, the quintuple block to take it down, because Carmine didn't have enough mana to recur and then replay Multani. Heiko didn't go for that.
And Heiko Lehnert on 4 life here, but with all of those saplings in play along with Slimefoot, he's at a virtual some amount more than that. Anytime one of those saplings dies, he will get to drain Carmine for 1.
Oh wow! Wild Onslaught. Well, that definitely changes the combat math. When kicked, 2 +1/+1 counters on every creature. Let's see if Heiko attacks all out with everything. Might that be lethal? Carmine has 3 blockers, so that would be 10. No, that's 15 coming through, and then maybe 2 saplings die.
Well, yeah, I mean, saplings, at least 1 sapling getting blocked. No, 2 saplings getting blocked will be dying. 4 blockers.
And, I mean, Talent Omnivore, it only gains life when you sacrifice a sapling, I believe.
That's correct. There are no other saplings in play for Carmine to sacrifice right now. He still does do a little bit of sacrificing here simply to make sure that his Omnivore is able to survive this combat.
Tim, I've got good news for you. We've now reached the this is uncommentatable speed. So we're going to just let
Challenge
people...
accepted.
It's at 4 times real speed because this game still carried on and ploughed on. You'll see matches changing elsewhere, but as players are getting ready for round number 2, and we have to squeeze in a quick swap of commentators as well. So as you can see, you've got Taji over Benthic, Druid down. Lots of blocks occurring. I don't think, Frank, you can quite do the optimal blocking at 4 times the speed.
Well, I'm not that fast, indeed.
No. If we had Shota here, maybe.
I do think that Heiko on the previous turn was correct not to attack with everything, because even if it may have been exactly lethal, if it weren't for Talent Omnivore, Carmine could always sacrifice a creature that's blocking a Sapperling, just so that blocked Sapperling doesn't die and thereby negate the Slimefoot trigger.
Oh, interesting.
That may have been the final point that changed the decision whether to attack or not.
And as things stand here, still more saplings coming along for Carmine Den Yellow. That meaning that the straightforward attacks for Heiko Lehnert, not so straightforward. He gets to gradually rebuild his board, put out more creatures with Slimefoot. But Multani is only getting bigger with each and every turn.
No, I love this format. There's all these late game cards where players just go into insanity mode and attack with some humongous, what is this, a 9/9 trample, and then it's I'll block with
10 power of creatures.
It's like your usual board state in Dominaria Limited.
And returning lands to hand to get Multani back is even better than normal when you have your Horn of Greed / Courser of Crufix in play.
Is it over? It's tatty over.
And a Steel Leaf champion as well, because you know what? Sometimes you've got triple green available in your green-black-blue deck.
On turn 19.
I mean, not embarrassing on turn 19, Steel Leaf champion. Were it not for the fact that some of these creatures have been pumped up so much, not being able to be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, very relevant in this matchup against so many sapling tokens.
Yeah, it does seem like in the late game, Multani is the better bomb than Slimefoot when it comes to late game mana sinks. But it does look like this game can last for quite a while still.
So Andra Chibak wins his game against Jason Toms. Are we going to have the awkward anticlimactic, the other 2 players win and hence Multani doesn't matter situation? It's definitely possible.
Oh, another Slimefoot. Okay, well, Carmine is now fairly full ahead.
Yeah, Carmine in yellow here.
If he just attacks with everything on the next turn, that is probably lethal.
I mean, he has a Thalid Omnivore.
I mean, here, you figure it out. Enjoy the combat math. But
yeah, this is...
Yeah, I don't really see a good block when you have to keep in mind Multani, which is Trample. Any Sapperling dying will trigger Slimefoot. And yeah, Heiko doesn't have all that many creatures compared to Carmine's... Well, what is this, 13?
There we go.
There was
that did it.
Even a Vicious Offering in hand at the end. alongside the handshake. And what I have learned so far from this round 1 here at Grand Prix Bologna is that these green-black decks seem like a lot of fun.
They certainly do. We've got round 2 coming right up. We have to get away to a quick break in the meantime. But when we do return, sitting in place of Tim and Frank will be Riley Knight and Raf. What's his surname? Capation? No. Raf someone will be here anyway. So we'll see you in just a couple of minutes for round number 2.